Kathara adjusted her cloak, blending into the dim shadows of the human colony's outskirts. Her target lived here, a man named Adrian Sloane. The report said he was a diplomat, a minor player in the interstellar political theater, someone who should have been an easy mark. But that raised the question. Why would her handlers assign her this mission? Assassinating a low-profile human seemed beneath her skills. Her missions were typically reserved for high-ranking military figures, individuals whose absence would shake the balance of power. Yet she couldn't ignore the assignment. Orders were orders, and Kathara was not one to disobey. "I still think this is a waste of time," she murmured, her voice low enough to blend with the rustle of nearby leaves. "Sloane's no threat to us. He's a bureaucrat." Her mission partner, an operative named Renak, stepped up beside her. Tall, broad-shouldered, and bearing the faint scars of dozens of campaigns, Renak had been at her side for years. He carried the heavier equipment, plasma charges, a data interceptor, while she handled the infiltration gear. They'd completed many missions together, and she trusted him. Most of the time, he rubbed at his jawline, considering her words. "Orders aren't about threats," Renak replied. "They're about control. Someone higher up sees him as a problem. Maybe it's political leverage. Maybe it's a message." Kathara frowned but didn't argue. Renak had a way of simplifying things to their core. While she preferred to pick apart motives and weigh risks, he just got the job done. They approached the colony's outer fence, a combination of human and alien technology. Renak knelt to bypass the security panel while Kathara kept watch. The colony was quiet, save for the occasional hum of a transport vehicle overhead. Most of the settlement's population was asleep. Kathara's enhanced vision caught glimpses of distant figures moving behind illuminated windows. Their lives looked simple. Humans laughing together, eating together, resting. There was a strange intimacy to their routine that she found fascinating. Her own people didn't show emotion so freely, nor did they gather in such casual ways. They were raised to be precise, disciplined. Watching these humans, Kathara couldn't help but feel like an intruder. "Panels down," Renak said. "You're up." Kathara crouched beside him, bypassing the secondary layer of security. Her fingers moved quickly, inputting commands and rerouting data streams. Within moments, the fence's locking mechanism disengaged. She slipped through the opening, Renak following close behind. The estate housing Adrian Sloane was unassuming, especially for someone supposedly important enough to warrant her attention. It was a modest structure, human in design but decorated with hints of alien craftsmanship. Small sculptures from other colonies dotted the garden path leading to the entrance. The house was surrounded by a carefully trimmed hedge, the leaves glinting faintly in the moonlight. Kathara noted the odd choice of plants, recognizing several species native to other worlds. This man's diplomatic ties were on display in every corner of his home. "Doesn't look like someone ready for an ambush," Renak whispered. Kathara nodded. "Let's go around back. Quieter that way." They moved silently, navigating the perimeter until they reached a rear entryway. The door's lock was old, easily overridden. Kathara entered first, scanning the interior. The layout was simple: living area, office space, a small kitchen. Adrian's file said he lived alone, but she was wary of unexpected guests. Renak took up position near the hallway, his weapon at the ready. Kathara moved toward the office where her data indicated he spent most of his nights. Adrian was sitting at his desk when she found him. He wasn't asleep, nor was he working. He was waiting. The moment she stepped into the room, he turned his chair to face her. His expression wasn't one of fear, but of curiosity. "Kathara," he said calmly, surprising her with the familiarity of her name. "I wondered when you'd arrive." She froze for a fraction of a second. How did he know her name? That wasn't in the briefing. He was supposed to be an uninformed target, unaware of his impending death. Yet here he sat, completely at ease, as if he'd been expecting her all along. "How do you know me?" she asked, her tone sharper than intended. "I've been keeping track of your movements for a while now," Adrian said. "You're quite skilled, but I had a feeling you'd come to see me eventually." Renak, still in the hallway, tensed. Kothara could feel his unease even without looking at him. She stepped closer, trying to read Adrian's expression. There was no malice there, no sign of deception, just calm resolve. "Why would a human like you be tracking me?" she pressed. "You're a diplomat. Your kind doesn't meddle." Adrian's lips quirked into a faint smile. "Let's just say I have my reasons. I know why you're here, and I don't blame you. But if you'll allow it, I'd like to explain a few things before you decide what to do next." Kothara hesitated. Her instincts screamed at her to end it now, to fulfill the mission and leave. But there was something in his voice, an unusual certainty that unnerved her. Renak shifted behind her, ready to act if necessary. For now, she lowered her weapon slightly, curious despite herself. "You have 5 minutes," she said coldly. "That's all I'll need," Adrian replied. Chapter 2. The Encounter. Kothara moved cautiously into the room, her gaze fixed on Adrian. His calm demeanor put her on edge. Most targets either panicked or begged. This one didn't even flinch. "Why don't we start with why you're here?" Adrian asked, his voice calm, almost welcoming. "Don't play games," Kothara replied sharply. "You know exactly why." Renak stepped into the doorway behind her, his weapon drawn but not aimed. He was watching Adrian, his expression hard. "Just say the word," he muttered to Kothara. She held up a hand, keeping her focus on Adrian. "You seem very sure of yourself for someone who's about to die." Adrian's brow furrowed slightly, but his voice remained steady. "I'm sure of my purpose, not my survival. If you wanted me dead already, I'd be dead. Instead, you're asking questions." Kothara glanced back at Renak, who shrugged. "If he's buying us time, let him talk." "Could be useful," Renak said. Adrian took the hint and continued. "You've been given a version of the truth, one your superiors carefully chose for you. They didn't tell you why they want me gone, just that I'm a threat. But I have information that might make you question their motives." Kothara smirked humorlessly. "Information? What makes you think I care about what you know?" "Because you're still here," Adrian said. "And if you didn't care, you wouldn't be listening. So hear me out. If what I'm about to say is wrong, you'll kill me and your mission's done. If it's right, though—" He let his words hang, watching her carefully. Renak crossed his arms, shifting his weight slightly. "Let's hear it, then. If you're lying, we'll know." Kothara nodded curtly, giving Adrian a few moments to speak. "You have 2 minutes." Adrian leaned back in his chair, his posture remaining relaxed. "The negotiations I'm part of aren't just about trade deals. They're about preventing a larger conflict, one that certain groups in your government actually want. They stand to gain from the instability, from forcing alliances to crumble and drawing out tensions. My role here is simple. I'm trying to keep that from happening. The last thing I want is a war, and I'm sure you don't either." Kothara kept her expression neutral, but she could sense Renak's skepticism growing. "What proof do you have?" Renak asked. "Words don't mean much coming from a target." Adrian gestured toward the terminal on his desk. "Everything's here. Communications intercepted from your own leadership. Documents detailing their true intentions. You can review them yourself." Kothara stepped forward, scanning the terminal. She didn't trust Adrian, but if he was telling the truth, it would explain the odd details she'd noticed about this assignment. Her superior's refusal to provide more context, the rushed timeline, the subtle hints that this mission wasn't like the others. "Why are you showing us this?" she demanded. "If you had this information, why not go public?" Adrian's smile faded. "Because I'd be discredited instantly. Your leaders are too skilled at controlling the narrative. If I reveal the truth without proof, I'm just another human liar. But if someone like you, someone they trust, sees it, maybe that changes things." Renak frowned. "You're asking us to betray our own people?" "I'm asking you to think for yourselves," Adrian replied. "And if you decide I'm lying, you can end this right now. But if I'm right, you'll have to make a choice. Follow orders blindly or stop something much worse from happening." Kothara stared at the terminal, her fingers hovering over the keys. The tension in the room was palpable. Renak's grip on his weapon tightened, but he didn't move. Adrian remained seated, calm, waiting for her response. Finally, Kathara spoke. Renak, lock the door. We're not done here yet. Chapter 3. The Unexpected Alliance. Renak secured the door while Kathara scrolled through Adrian's terminal, her expression unreadable. Lines of text, intercepted messages, and classified documents flashed across the screen. Renak leaned against the wall, watching her closely. Well, anything convincing in there? Kathara didn't answer right away. Her eyes skimmed through a series of reports. Coordinated disruptions, manufactured political scandals. Each piece of data hinted at deliberate sabotage orchestrated by someone within their ranks. She finally straightened and looked at Adrian, her expression sharp. If what you're showing me is real, then someone's been playing us. But that doesn't explain why you kept this hidden. Adrian spread his hands, leaning back in his chair. I'm not exactly a trusted voice among your people. They wouldn't listen to me, and if I'd come forward, I'd have been dead long before you arrived. My only choice was to wait until someone like you came along. Renak narrowed his eyes. Someone like us? What makes you think we'd care? Adrian met Renak's gaze, his calm demeanor unwavering. Because you're not mindless soldiers. You're here asking questions instead of pulling the trigger. That tells me you think for yourselves. And that means you know something isn't right about this assignment. Kathara turned her back on Adrian and paced the room. You're asking us to turn on our own people based on data we can't even verify. This could be a trick. A way to sow doubt and buy yourself more time. Then don't trust me, Adrian replied. Trust what you see. Dig deeper. Find more. I'm not asking for your loyalty. I'm asking you to look at the facts. Renak shrugged, his tone sardonic. We could just shoot you now and say we found nothing. Mission complete. You could, Adrian admitted. But you'd never know if you made the right call. Kathara stopped pacing and faced Adrian again. Why does this matter to you so much? You could have walked away, let our leaders tear themselves apart, and left us to deal with the fallout. Why get involved? Adrian's voice softened. Because I believe we can do better. Not just humans. All of us. I've seen too many conflicts escalate because people didn't take the time to listen, to understand. I'm trying to stop one before it starts. Kathara exchanged a glance with Renak. The unspoken question passed between them. What now? Renak sighed and crossed his arms. Fine. Say we believe you just for a second. What's your plan? You can't expect us to just run back to HQ and spill everything. No, Adrian said. That would get us all killed. But you have connections, access. With your help, we could gather more proof. Something solid that can't be dismissed. We could expose the ones pulling the strings. Kathara tilted her head. You want us to be your spies? Adrian shook his head. I want you to be the ones who see the truth and decide what to do with it. If that means staying silent, so be it. If it means taking action, that's your choice. I'm just asking you to look. Renak let out a low chuckle. You make it sound so easy. You do realize what happens if we're wrong about you. I do, Adrian said. And I also know what happens if you're wrong about them. Kathara studied him for a long moment. Then she turned to Renak. He's not lying. At least not completely. This data feels real. But I don't trust him either. Renak sighed, rubbing his temples. So what's the play? We just stick around and see what else he can show us. For now, Kathara replied. We keep him alive, see where this leads. If it's a dead end, we finish the mission. If it's not, she trailed off, her expression hardening. Then we'll figure it out. Adrian gave a small nod. That's all I'm asking. Keep me alive long enough to show you the rest. Renak muttered something under his breath and sat down on a nearby chair. Great. Now we're babysitting a human diplomat. Just what I always wanted. Kathara shot him a look. You're not babysitting anyone. Stay sharp and don't forget. If he's lying, we end this. Agreed. Agreed, Renak said reluctantly. Adrian leaned forward. I'll do my best to make this worth your time. We'll start by going through the files you haven't seen yet. There's more here than what I showed you. Kathara's voice was steady. We'll be the judge of that. But make no mistake. You step out of line, and this truce ends. Adrian nodded. Understood. With that, Kathara returned to the terminal. Renak leaned back in his chair, grumbling under his breath. Adrian watched them both, knowing that the fragile alliance they just formed could break at any moment. Chapter 4. Dangerous Secrets. In the dimly lit room, Adrian sat at the terminal, carefully pulling up more files. The air hung heavy with tension as Kathara and Renak stood on either side of him, their expressions grim. Renak leaned against the wall, arms crossed, keeping one hand close to his sidearm. Kathara hovered just behind Adrian's chair, her eyes flicking between the screen and his face. "I'll say this again," Renak muttered. "If you're playing us, I'm putting a bolt through you myself." Adrian glanced back at him. "I have no intention of playing anyone. I just need you to see what's happening. Then you can decide for yourselves." "You keep saying that," Kathara said coldly, "but we're still waiting for something that justifies why you're still breathing." Adrian opened a new document on the screen. "This is a series of intercepted communications between your leadership and a covert operations group within your own ranks. Look at the language, the directives. These aren't orders for defense. They're instructions for dismantling diplomatic relations and instigating conflicts." Kathara moved closer, reading over his shoulder. Her frown deepened. "You're suggesting they're manufacturing hostility on purpose. Why?" "Because instability is profitable for some," Adrian explained. "When tensions rise, defense budgets grow, private contractors get involved, and certain political figures can consolidate power. Peace, on the other hand, doesn't benefit them the same way." Renak pushed off the wall and stepped closer, his brow furrowed. "How do we know these messages aren't fabricated? You could have made all this up to save your own skin." Adrian looked up at him. "I can provide source data, raw encryption keys, original transmission logs. You can verify it against your own internal channels. It's all here." Kathara straightened. "Let's say, for a moment, that this is real. You're asking us to act on information that, if we're caught with it, makes us traitors. What do you expect us to do with it?" "I'm not telling you to do anything," Adrian said, his tone measured. "I'm giving you the facts. What you choose to do with them is up to you. If you think it's safer to ignore this, then finish the mission and leave. But if you think there's a chance to stop a larger problem before it starts..." He let the thought trail off, leaving them to fill in the blanks. Renak glanced at Kathara, his expression conflicted. "I don't like this. Too many ways it could go wrong." "Agreed," Kathara replied. "But if he's telling the truth, leaving it alone could be worse." Adrian leaned back, his gaze steady. "You have more than enough skill to dig into this on your own. You don't need me to hold your hand. All I'm asking is that you take a closer look before you make your final decision." Kathara turned to Renak. "Thoughts?" Renak exhaled slowly. "I think we're walking into something far bigger than we were told. And I don't like being used." He jabbed a finger toward Adrian. "But if this is a trap, I'll end it myself." Adrian nodded. "Fair enough." Kathara stepped back from the terminal, her mind racing. "Renak, get the data onto a secure drive. We'll review it in detail later. For now, we keep him under surveillance. No movement, no contact with anyone." Renak grumbled but set to work transferring the files. "You're lucky she's calling the shots," he said to Adrian. "I'd have just turned you into a cautionary tale." "I'm aware," Adrian replied dryly. Kathara shot Renak a warning look. "Focus. We're not done yet." As the files transferred, the room grew quiet again. Renak glanced at the terminal. "If this is all true, it's going to get messy." "It already is," Kathara said, her voice low. "The question is whether we clean it up or leave it for someone else." Renak shook his head, closing his hand around the drive once the transfer was complete. "This better be worth it." Adrian looked at them both. "It's not about what it's worth to me. It's about what it might prevent." Kathara didn't reply. She turned toward the door, gesturing for Renak to follow. We'll review this later. For now, stay alert. We still don't know who else might be watching. Renak followed her out, muttering under his breath. Adrian remained in the chair, staring at the darkened screen. For the first time, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time, uncertainty. But he pushed it aside. There was no going back now. Chapter 5. Fleeing together. Renak hauled the pack over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the dense forest ahead. I still don't see why we didn't take the safer route, he muttered. Kathara shot him a sharp look. Because they'll expect the safe route. If we stick to the main paths, we'll be caught before nightfall. Adrian, standing a few steps behind, adjusted his grip on the portable data core he carried. She's right. We have to stay unpredictable. Renak groaned. Yeah, sure. Let's keep trusting the human who got us into this mess. Adrian sighed. I didn't create the situation. I just revealed it. There's a difference. Not much of one, Renak replied, brushing past him and taking the lead. Let's move. The longer we stand here arguing, the closer they'll get. Kathara nodded and followed, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. The thick foliage made it hard to see far, but she could hear faint echoes behind them. Disturbances in the air and ground that suggested they weren't alone. Do you think it's one of ours or another party entirely? Renak asked, his voice low. Kathara paused, listening again. Hard to say. They're being cautious, but not still. Ion, they'll send whoever gets the job done. Kathara glanced back at Adrian. You need to move faster. If they catch up, we won't have time to argue about loyalty. Adrian nodded, doing his best to keep pace with the two operatives. As they wove through the forest, Renak suddenly raised his hand, signaling them to stop. He crouched low, peering through the underbrush. Something's not right. Kathara dropped into a crouch beside him, her hand on the hilt of her weapon. What is it? Movement about 50 meters ahead, Renak whispered. Could be wildlife, but... He frowned. It feels off. Adrian hunkered down behind them, looking tense. What do we do? Renak shot him an annoyed glance. We? Nothing. You stay here and let the professionals handle it. Kathara suppressed a smile. Stay low, Adrian. Renak and I will check it out. The two operatives crept forward, their movements soundless. Adrian watched from his hiding spot, his heart pounding. He wasn't a soldier or a spy. He was a diplomat, someone who'd spent his life talking people out of conflicts rather than surviving them. But now he found himself relying on two alien operatives who could easily decide he wasn't worth the trouble. Renak and Kathara returned after a few minutes, their expressions grim. It's worse than we thought, Kathara said. They've sent a squad of trackers, armed, experienced, and closing in fast. Renak added, We're outnumbered. If they catch us, it's over. Adrian glanced between them, his brow furrowing. Then we need to find a way to lose them. Can't we set a trap? Create a distraction? Renak looked skeptical. You know how to set up an ambush, diplomat? No, Adrian admitted. But you do. Kathara nodded. He's not wrong. If we can slow them down, it'll buy us time. Renak, you're the demolitions expert. What can you rig up? Renak grumbled, pulling a small pack from his gear. Fine. I can set a few charges to block their path. But it'll take time and they'll hear the blast. It'll give us a window to gain some distance, Kathara said. Do it. While Renak prepared the explosives, Kathara and Adrian kept watch. She noticed Adrian's hands shaking slightly. Despite his composed demeanor earlier, it was clear the situation was wearing on him. You all right? She asked quietly. Not exactly used to this, Adrian admitted. But I'll manage. You'd better, Kathara replied. If we're going to make it out of this, we all need to pull our weight. Renak called from the other side of the clearing. Charges are set. Once they hit that choke point, they'll have a nasty surprise. Good, Kathara said. Let's move. The trio pushed deeper into the forest. A few minutes later, a distant explosion rumbled through the trees. Renak glanced back, smirking. That'll slow them down. Maybe even scare off a few. Kothara led them further away from the blast zone, keeping a steady pace. As the sound of pursuit faded, she allowed herself a moment of relief. But only a moment. "We're not out of the woods yet," she said, glancing at Renak. "Next time, remind me to take the safe route." Renak chuckled, adjusting his pack. "Sure thing. As long as you remember we're still alive because we didn't." Adrian, still catching his breath, managed a weak smile. "I'll take alive over safe any day." Chapter 6, A Growing Connection. The campfire crackled softly in the clearing as the three of them huddled close, their breath visible in the cool night air. Renak sat back against a boulder, inspecting his weapon. Kothara stood near the edge of the trees, scanning the forest for any sign of pursuit. Adrian crouched by the fire, carefully heating a pack of field rations. "Still no movement out there," Kothara said quietly, her voice low but steady. "It's too quiet." Renak chuckled under his breath. "You sound disappointed." "No," she replied, her gaze still fixed on the trees. "Just suspicious. Quiet doesn't mean safe." Adrian stirred the ration pack with a small stick, his face drawn. "How long before they pick up our trail again?" Renak shrugged. "Could be hours. Could be minutes. Depends on how many are left after that explosion." Kothara returned to the fire, her movements smooth and purposeful. She settled on a nearby rock, watching Adrian as he continued to stir the meal. "You're not used to this, are you?" He glanced up at her, his expression tired. "Not even a little. I negotiate peace agreements. I don't usually run for my life through alien forests." Renak snorted. "And yet, here you are. Alive. For now." Adrian offered a faint smile. "Small miracles." Kothara studied him for a moment, her head tilted slightly. "Why didn't you tell us earlier? About the corruption, the messages? If you'd been upfront from the start, maybe we could have planned better." Adrian sighed, setting the stick down. "Because I didn't think you'd listen. You were sent to kill me, remember? Hard to convince someone you're not the bad guy when their orders say otherwise." Renak leaned forward, his expression skeptical. "And yet we're here, listening now. What changed?" "Your actions," Adrian said simply. "When you hesitated, when you started asking questions, I saw that you weren't just mindless soldiers. That was my chance. If I'd come out with all this from the start, you might have dismissed it as desperation." Kothara crossed her arms. "Maybe. Or maybe we wouldn't have had to run for our lives if you'd given us more time to think." Renak waved a hand. "What's done is done. We're in this now, whether we like it or not." Silence settled over the group as they ate their meals. The firelight flickered across their faces, casting long shadows into the forest. After a while, Adrian broke the quiet. "Why did you two join your military? Was it always about following orders? Or did you have a choice?" Kothara looked at Renak, who raised an eyebrow at her. She hesitated before answering. "It wasn't a choice. Not really. Where we come from, service is mandatory. You're trained from a young age to follow commands, to be efficient, to carry out your duty. That's just how it is." Renak nodded in agreement. "Some of us take to it, others not so much. But you learn fast. If you don't, you're not around long." Adrian frowned. "And you're okay with that? Living like that?" Kothara's gaze flicked away. "It's not about being okay with it. It's just reality." Renak spoke up, his voice a little softer than usual. "It's all we've ever known. Until now, maybe." Adrian studied their faces. "And now that you've seen another way, do you think it can change?" Kothara didn't answer immediately. She stared into the fire, the flames reflected in her dark eyes. "I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. But if there's a chance." She shook her head. "It's not that simple." Renak looked at her, then at Adrian. "Why does it matter to you so much? Why do you care what happens to us?" Adrian met Renak's gaze. "Because I don't think anyone should have to live without choices." The words hung in the air, heavier than the quiet that followed. Renak said nothing, his expression unreadable. Kothara glanced at Adrian, then turned her attention back to the forest. "Get some rest," she said at last. "I'll take first watch." Renak grunted in agreement, stretching out by the fire. Adrian nodded, lying down on the ground nearby. As his eyes closed, he heard the faint sound of Kathara moving through the camp, her steps quiet but deliberate. Even as sleep tugged at him, Adrian couldn't help but wonder how far they were willing to go, and whether they would find the answers they sought before it was too late. Chapter 7: Betrayal and Resolve. The clearing where they had camped the night before was long behind them, but Kathara still felt uneasy. She walked in silence, listening to the faint rustling of leaves in the distance. Renak followed close, his steps heavy on the uneven terrain. Adrian struggled to keep up, his breathing labored. "Any idea how close they are?" Renak asked, his voice breaking the quiet. Kathara shook her head. "They'll be cautious after the traps we set. But they won't stop." Adrian stumbled over a root and caught himself on a tree. "Why not just send more troops? Overwhelm us?" Renak smirked. "Because that would draw attention. The ones chasing us aren't trying to make a spectacle. They're trying to make us disappear quietly. Too many soldiers, and someone will notice." Kathara glanced back at Adrian. "Keep moving. We can't slow down." The three pushed forward, weaving through the dense forest. As the day wore on, the tension between them grew thicker. Renak's patience seemed to wear thin, while Adrian's exhaustion was becoming more and more apparent. Finally, they came to a rocky outcrop overlooking a narrow ravine. Kathara held up a hand, signaling them to stop. "We'll rest here, just for a few minutes." Adrian collapsed onto a rock, breathing hard. "So what's the plan? Keep running until they give up?" Kathara shot him a look. "No. We need to find out who sent them and why. That's the only way we end this." Renak leaned against a boulder, his arms crossed. "Good luck with that. The kind of people who hire these assassins don't exactly leave a calling card." Adrian looked up at Kathara. "You said you've worked with these people before, your handlers, your chain of command. Do you really think they'd turn on you so easily?" Kathara hesitated. "I don't know what to think anymore, but if they sent someone after us, then something bigger is happening. And we need to understand it before it's too late." Renak snorted. Big talk from someone who didn't hesitate to take this mission in the first place. Kathara turned to him, her eyes narrowing. "You think I don't regret it? You think I don't see now that we were lied to?" Renak didn't answer immediately. He stared out over the ravine, his jaw tightening. "I just don't like feeling used. And I don't like how much you seem to trust him," he added, jerking his head toward Adrian. Adrian raised his hands in a calming gesture. "I don't expect you to trust me, but I'm telling you the truth. The messages I showed you were real. And if we can get out of this alive, we can expose what's really going on." Kathara's expression softened slightly. "And if you're wrong?" Adrian met her gaze. "Then I'll have put you both at risk for nothing. But I don't think I am. And I think you know that." Renak kicked at a loose stone, sending it tumbling down the ravine. "Let's say we manage to get proof. What then? It's not like we can just walk into headquarters and present our findings. They'll kill us before we get the chance." Kathara considered this. "We'll need a secure connection, someone we can trust on the inside. If we can get this information to them, they can start working to dismantle the operation from within." Renak rolled his eyes. "Right? And who do we trust? I don't see a line of loyal allies waiting to help us out." Adrian spoke up. "What about that contact you mentioned earlier? The one who used to serve with you but left before things started to get corrupt?" Renak frowned. "You mean Halleck? He's been out of the system for years. No guarantee he'll help us, or that he hasn't gone off the grid entirely." "It's the only lead we have," Kathara said firmly. "We need to try." Renak sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "All right, fine. But if he sells us out, this is on you." Kathara nodded, her expression resolute. "Let's move. The sooner we get to him, the better." As they prepared to leave, Adrian pulled Kathara aside. "What if he doesn't help? What's our backup plan?" Kathara stared at him for a moment before answering. Then we keep running until we find another way. But we're not giving up. Not now. Adrian nodded slowly. All right, lead the way. The three of them moved off the rocky outcrop and back into the forest, their pace quick but cautious. They knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, they were united by more than just survival. They had a common goal, one that gave them a reason to keep going. Chapter 8. Standing Together. By the time the three of them reached Halleck's remote station, the forest had given way to jagged hills and rocky terrain. The battered outpost sat precariously on a steep ridge, its weather-worn panels glinting faintly in the weak sunlight. Kothara signaled for Adrian and Renak to hang back as she approached the door. "I'll talk to him first," she said, glancing at Renak. "No need to scare him off." Renak grunted in response. "Just make it quick. We're not exactly invisible out here." Kothara nodded and tapped on the rusted control panel beside the entrance. After a tense moment, a holographic display flickered to life, showing a grizzled alien with a prominent scar running down his face. Halleck's eyes narrowed at the sight of her. "Kothara." His voice was rough and gravelly. "Didn't think I'd ever see you again. What's this about?" "I need your help," she said without hesitation. "We're dealing with something bigger than us. I can't say more until we're inside." Halleck regarded her with suspicion. "And you brought humans with you?" "They're part of the reason I'm still alive," Kothara said. "Just let us in, please." Halleck hesitated a moment longer before the door creaked open. Kothara motioned to Adrian and Renak, and the three of them entered the cramped, dimly lit interior. The air inside was stale, and the faint hum of old machinery filled the space. Halleck leaned against a control console, his arms crossed. "Start talking," he said. Kothara explained everything. Her mission, the data Adrian had uncovered, and the pursuit that had driven them to Halleck's door. Adrian stood back, letting her do the talking, while Renak kept a watchful eye on the exit. When Kothara finished, Halleck let out a low whistle. "Sounds like you're in deeper trouble than I thought," he said. "But why come to me? I'm not exactly in the business of saving people anymore." "You still have contacts," Kothara said. "You know how the system works. If anyone can get this information where it needs to go, it's you." Halleck looked at her skeptically. "And what's in it for me? You care about the truth, don't you?" Adrian said, stepping forward. "You served with Kothara. You know what she stands for. If what we're saying is true, it means your people are being manipulated by those in power. Don't you want to stop that?" Halleck snorted. "You're a smooth talker, human. I'll give you that. But smooth talk doesn't guarantee survival. You're asking me to stick my neck out for you, and all I've got is your word." Kothara reached into her pack and pulled out a data drive. "This isn't just our word. This is everything we've gathered. Communications logs, intercepted orders, evidence of corruption at the highest levels. All you have to do is get it into the right hands." Halleck stared at the drive for a long moment before finally taking it. "Fine. I'll see what I can do. But if you're wrong, or if this comes back on me, you won't have to worry about that," Renak said. "If anyone comes after you, they'll have to go through us first." Halleck's mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile. "You've changed, Kothara. I never thought I'd see you running with humans." "Things change," she replied. "People change." Halleck tucked the drive into a secure compartment. "I'll need time, a few days at least. Until then, you should lay low. There's an old cave system not far from here. It's off the main paths. No one will think to look for you there." Kothara nodded. "Thank you, Halleck. We owe you." Halleck waved a hand dismissively. "Just make sure this is worth it. I don't like wasting my time." The three of them left the outpost as quickly as they'd come. They made their way to the cave Halleck had mentioned, finding it hidden among the craggy rocks. Inside, they set up a small camp, the cool air and the quiet surroundings giving them a moment of respite. Renak leaned against the cave wall, watching as Adrian and Kothara worked together to set up their limited supplies. He shook his head and muttered, "Never thought I'd be camping out with a human, waiting on a rogue agent to save the day." Adrian smirked. It's not exactly how I pictured things either, but it's better than the alternative. Kathara glanced over at Renak. You're still here, aren't you? That has to count for something. Renak shrugged. I guess, but I'm not holding my breath. If Halleck doesn't come through, we'll deal with it, Kathara said firmly. One way or another, we'll make it work. Adrian looked at her, his expression serious. Do you really believe that? She met his gaze. I have to. Adrian nodded slowly. Then so do I.